Hello, my friends. Let's talk about what just happened. Because the Europeans are finally being forced to confront a reality they refused to believe until it slapped them in the face. Start with Trump. He isn't simply interested in Greenland. He's treating Greenland as a strategic necessity, a geometry problem, and most importantly, a test of dominance. His argument is blunt. The Arctic is the next arena. The fight for the Arctic is real, and the United States cannot outsource its security obligations when NATO guarantees could drag Washington into conflict later. That's the logic he's selling. Better to seize control now. Peace through strength. Fold Greenland into the U.S. and remove the possibility of conflict entirely. He frames it as inevitability. America projects strength, Europe projects weakness, and therefore America must act. Now, Europeans love to pretend Trump is always bluffing. They love to pretend his threats are theatrical and that the alliance will restrain him. But that delusion ended the moment he published the long truth social post that sent the European elite into meltdown mode because it wasn't just rhetoric. It was a tariff gun pointed directly at Denmark and a handful of key European states, tied explicitly to a Greenland purchase deal. And here's the part Europe still doesn't understand. The trigger for Trump's escalation wasn't some grand strategic debate in Brussels. It was the Europeans trying to play cute. A few days ago, Europeans decided to respond to Trump's Greenland fixation by sending a symbolic handful of troops, 15, 20, whatever the exact mix, was like a theatrical gesture meant to signal we are serious without actually being serious. 10 soldiers from here, a dozen from there, a couple from somewhere else, an absurd micro-detachment assembled like a PR collage. The idea was to send a military message without committing real force or real risk. In European minds, that was clever. In American eyes, especially through a New York political instinct, it reads as mockery. And anyone who has lived in the United States long enough knows this rule. You don't play cute with Americans. You don't do half measures that look like you're trying to embarrass them while pretending you're being cooperative. You either do nothing or you do something serious. If you want a military signal, you don't send 20 troops. You send 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. Not that Europe can. Not that Europe has the manpower, readiness, logistics, or political spine to do it. But that's the point. If you cannot be serious, don't pretend. Instead, Europe chose the worst option, half-ass symbolism. And Trump responded exactly as expected. He looked at those 20 troops and heard, "We're laughing at you." So he decided to play that game. Then came the Truth Social post, long, theatrical, but strategically structured. It begins with a grievance. The United States has subsidized Denmark and the EU for years by not charging them tariffs or remuneration. Then it escalates to existential framing. World peace is at stake. Russia and China want Greenland. Denmark can't stop them. Denmark allegedly has 2 dog sleds as protection. And then Trump drives the stake. Only the United States of America under President Donald J. Trump can play in this game. That's not diplomacy. That's branding power as destiny. But the real weapon in the post is the conditional tariff schedule. Starting the 1st of February 2026, a 10% tariff on goods from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the UK, the Netherlands, and Finland. Then, the 1st of June 2026, it rises to 25%. And the key line is the extortion mechanism. Tariffs remain until a deal is reached for the complete and total purchase of Greenland. This is not an abstract threat. It's coercive negotiation disguised as national security policy. And Trump adds layers to justify it. He claims the U.S. has tried to buy Greenland for 150 years. He drags in Golden Dome and modern offensive defensive systems. He claims hundreds of billions are being spent on a dome that even includes potential protection for Canada, and that Greenland must be included because of angles, boundaries, geometry, the kind of simplified engineering necessity argument that plays well in domestic U.S. consumption. It sounds technical, inevitable, and non-ideological. Then he closes with faux openness. The U.S. is open to negotiation with Denmark or any of the countries that put so much at risk, despite decades of U.S. protection. That's the posture. We protected you. You disrespected us. Now pay up. And if you want out, sell. Notice what's happening here. Trump isn't seeking consensus within NATO. He is using NATO's reality, U.S. dominance, and the European dependency it creates as a lever against Europe. He's saying implicitly, you can't protect Greenland, you can't protect yourselves, you only have NATO because we underwrite it, therefore you don't get to block what we want in Greenland. And the Europeans, until yesterday, still didn't believe he was serious. That is why they sent the toy soldier detachment in the first place. They thought it was all theater. They assumed Trump would never dare to impose real economic pain on allies for an Arctic land grab, so they smirked and played games, thinking they were engaging in clever alliance politics. Now they're panicking because they just realized Trump intends to take Greenland hard way or easy way. He will purchase it, sure, but purchase, in this context means Denmark gets a face-saving payment, maybe a few billion, enough for Copenhagen to tell its citizens, we got compensated. But the outcome is predetermined. The message reads, I'm taking Greenland, negotiate terms or I will force terms. And Europe's response is the clearest evidence of strategic bankruptcy. They have no plan. What do you see on X? Scripted lines, territorial integrity, sovereignty, international law. This should be handled within NATO. Tariffs undermine shared prosperity. Dialogue is essential. They all say the same thing because they're all reading from the same mental playbook, moral language, legal language, alliance language, while avoiding the one thing that matters to Trump, power. Kaja Kallas, the EU's supposed top diplomat, posts that China and Russia must be having a field day because divisions among allies benefit them. She says if Greenland's security is at risk, NATO can address it. She warns tariffs make Europe and the U.S. poorer and distract from the core task of ending Russia's war against Ukraine. Look at that. Even now, she cannot stop talking about Russia and China. Even now, she cannot stop using Ukraine as a lens for everything. Her reflex is sanctions, slogans, and don't make Putin happy. That's not diplomacy. That's psychological dependency. Her mental model is, if we resist Trump, we help Russia. Therefore, don't resist Trump too much. It's grotesque. And ask the obvious question, why isn't she on a plane to Washington? Why isn't she camped outside Rubio's door? Why isn't she forcing urgent meetings? Because she can't. She can't even secure a serious meeting. Her diplomacy is press statements and sanctions packages. That's it. Ursula von der Leyen posts the predictable sermon. Territorial integrity and sovereignty are fundamental principles. The Arctic security issue is a shared transatlantic interest through NATO. The Danish exercise poses no threat. The EU stands in solidarity with Denmark and Greenland. Tariffs risk a dangerous downward spiral. Europe will remain united. But Ursula talking about international law to Trump is like reading bedtime stories to a bulldozer. Trump has made clear, repeatedly, that law is subordinate to power and interest. He doesn't want this resolved inside NATO. He wants NATO's European dependency to be used as leverage to compel a sale. And Ursula's record on negotiation with Trump, especially on trade, has been a catastrophe precisely because she negotiates like someone who believes the other side shares her religious attachment to process and norms. Trump doesn't. He sees that as weakness to exploit. Then you get Keir Starmer repeating the alliance script. Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. The future is for Greenlanders and Danes. Arctic security matters to NATO. Allies should do more to address the Russian threat. Tariffs on allies are wrong. The UK will pursue this with the US. And Alexander Stubb posts the same formula. Among allies, resolve issues through discussion. Strengthening Arctic security is important. European countries stand united. Dialogue continues. Tariffs undermine the transatlantic relationship and risk a downward spiral. Do you see the pattern? They all treat this like a normal alliance dispute. They still don't understand Trump is not playing alliance theology. He's playing acquisition, coercion, and domestic political marketing. Macron, as always, throws ambiguous warnings. Europe will respond in a united manner. No threat can influence us, neither in Greenland nor Ukraine. Then Bloomberg floats that the EU could halt trade with the US, as if that is a credible threat. But what exactly is Europe threatening? To stop trade with the US. And then what replace the US? Market with whom? Replace energy supplies with what? Replace LNG flows with what? Europe is trapped inside its own self-inflicted energy and industrial vulnerability, and Trump knows this. If the US wanted to play chicken, Europe would fold quickly because Europe has no cards. Europe's threat posture is mostly a performance. Trump, unlike Europe's leaders, is willing to detonate relationships if he thinks it strengthens his negotiating position or feeds his domestic narrative. That's why the EU is a mess. That's why the UK is a mess. They built their entire post-2014 posture around one illusion: the US. We'll always be behind them and we'll always treat them as partners. So they went around the world acting tough, especially toward Russia, because they assumed America would absorb the cost and provide the muscle. Now they are discovering the US doesn't have their back the way they thought, and it terrifies them. Meanwhile, you have protests in Greenland and Denmark. And you should feel for ordinary Greenlanders because they're being dragged into a geopolitical wrestling match they didn't choose. Reports describe sizable protests, thousands in a small population center outside US facilities, with a message that is essentially, stop, we don't want this. And the deeper truth is Greenlanders' own aspirations are more complicated than Europe's propaganda allows. Many want greater autonomy, even independence from Denmark, but that does not automatically translate into wanting to become an American possession. They're trapped between Copenhagen's weakness and Washington's appetite, and while Europe scrambles, it is still behaving like an entity that cannot prioritize. Ursula celebrates a Mercosur trade deal years in the making, while European farmers get squeezed. The political class will sell it as strategic success, while the real winners are financial structures positioned to absorb distressed assets when farmers buckle under pressure. That's the pattern: grand deals for headlines, structural pain for the base, and a transfer of assets upward. Now pivot to Ukraine, because the battlefield reality keeps sharpening while Europe argues over slogans. Reports indicate Russian forces continue to hunt and demolish what remains of Ukraine's air defense architecture. A Patriot system in Kharkov is reportedly located, verified, and destroyed. That matters because Kharkov is already under severe energy strain, blackouts, shortages, so losing a major system worsens vulnerability and psychological collapse. And Zelensky's posture reflects that. He's pushing messages on social platforms, begging for money and weapons, especially air defense. But the stock is not infinite. The West has already poured vast quantities into Ukraine. And if a U.S. Iran confrontation is looming, the priority stack shifts. Air defense systems don't go to Kiev if Washington is preparing for contingencies elsewhere. Europe, for its part, is demilitarized. It wants to posture, but it can't deliver. That's why you see internal Ukrainian elite warfare, intensifying oligarch clans, political factions, competing patrons, all fighting over what might be the last big payout. The final tranche of European money, the last major loan package, the last 90 billion type lifeline. Everyone wants to be the gatekeeper of the remaining cash and weapons. So you get scenes like Tymoshenko appearing in court under anti-corruption pressure, calling the Zelensky regime fascist, calling for liberation language that signals not moral awakening, but factional war. Klitschko, Poroshenko, Zaluzhny, Zelensky. They aren't unified wartime leadership. They're a collapsing patronage ecosystem fighting over the remainder. Then you have the Italian defense minister openly stating in parliament the core truth: Ukraine cannot win, will never win, is trying to survive. That's not a fringe comment. That's the slow leak of reality into official discourse. And it directly aligns with earlier hints from European leaders that maybe it's time to talk. That shift isn't generosity, it's fear. It's the recognition that the Ukraine project is exhausting Europe while producing no victory. And while Europe talks about building military production in Ukraine, the dream of turning Ukraine into an industrial hub reality crushes it again. The Rheinmetall narrative illustrates the fraud. There was supposed to be a major ammunition plant. Contracts were signed. CEOs visited. Speeches were made about Ukraine becoming Europe's defense production powerhouse. And yet construction reportedly hasn't even started. The excuse is bureaucracy, red tape, paperwork. No, the real reason is obvious. Everyone knows that the moment you build a high-value military-industrial facility in Ukraine and turn it into a production node, it becomes a target. It becomes a magnet for Russian strikes. You don't pour billions into a facility that can be destroyed in an evening. So what happens instead is predictable. Keep the contracts, keep the budget flows, build facilities elsewhere in Europe if you build it all, and let Ukraine production remain a marketing slogan. Share prices and lobbying wins still happen. Ukraine doesn't get the promised factory. Now Syria, because the regime change fantasy never ends the way it's sold. Assad removed, a new leadership figure dressed in a suit. Western voices cheer stability, democracy, a new Syria. Then, immediately, the reality: war, conflict between the new Damascus Authority and the Kurdish SDF. And the geopolitical grotesquerie is that the external sponsors overlap in contradiction. Turkey, the U.S., and Israel are implicated in propping up the new center. The Kurds are also propped up by U.S. and Israel. Strip away the PR and it becomes a simpler truth. Erdogan uses the new power arrangement to roll up the Kurds, which aligns perfectly with Turkish strategic goals. The Kurds, as always, learned too late what it means to be a disposable proxy. They were used to destabilize Assad. Now they're being left to Erdogan's appetite. Lindsey Graham threatens Caesar Act sanctions if Damascus moves against the SDF. I will do my best. That phrase alone tells you the hollowness of U.S. commitment rhetoric. Do my best does not stop tanks. It does not stop Turkey. It does not save proxies once Washington's attention shifts. And U.S. attention is shifting back to Iran. Trump is provoked by media framing. He's asked to comment on Iranian leadership posts accusing the U.S. of engineering unrest. The media reads the inflammatory lines to him. He reacts with anger and starts talking about new leadership in Iran. That is how these narratives are shaped. Not through sober assessment, but through a constant push to keep the regime change machinery turning. Then you get the more surreal but still telling development, talk of a peace board, a Trump-branded quasi-institution where invited countries are asked to contribute $1 billion for membership with terms that extend or renew based on contributions. The charter language is broad, promotes stability, lawful governance, secure enduring peace in threatened regions, and it doesn't specifically mention Gaza, which triggers speculation that it's meant as an alternative framework to the UN, perhaps even as a competitive structure against other global blocs. Whatever the exact intent, the underlying pattern is consistent with Trump: monetize influence, centralize control under an American chairman, and brand the structure as one of a kind. You can laugh at it, but you should not ignore it, because it fits the same coercive logic as Greenland tariffs: pay to play, submit to the chair, and accept that America sets the terms. Which brings me to the clown world summary, because satire is sometimes the only way to capture the speed of collapse. Medvedev's list reads like absurd comedy but mirrors real headlines. The U.S. prepares to attack Greenland, targeting the island itself rather than abstract Atlantic solidarity. Europeans punished with tariffs for defending NATO. French officials talk about withdrawal. Tymoshenko calls Ukraine's regime fascist and claims the country won't survive 5 years. Leaders speak about dissolving their own states, and then the capstone: Trump will soon announce contact with aliens. The punchline lands because the world has become so unmoored that even the ridiculous starts to feel plausible. And indeed, you see reports floating around originating from tabloids that Trump might announce alien-related claims during a major sports speech. And you see absurd secondary headlines like "Central banks must plan for a crisis sparked by aliens." Whether those stories are noise or signals, the fact they circulate at all tells you something about the information environment. Chaos is now a feature, not a bug. So here's the strategic conclusion, and it's the same conclusion that keeps repeating across every theater, from Greenland to Ukraine to Syria to Iran. Europe has no agency. It confused alliance religion with power. It assumed the U.S. would always act like a benevolent patron. It believed it could posture with symbolism: 20 troops here, a statement there, and never pay a price. Trump has just shown them otherwise. He is not negotiating within NATO. He is using NATO as leverage. He is not respecting Europe's legal sermons. He is weaponizing Europe's dependence. And Europe, lacking a serious foreign policy machine, responds with scripts and panic. Meanwhile, Russia benefits from the fracture, not because Russia needs to conquer Europe, it doesn't, but because Europe is demonstrating it cannot protect itself, cannot coordinate, cannot decide, and cannot stop Washington from treating it as subordinate. The balance of power shifts not only because Russia is strong, but because Europe has chosen weakness as a system. That is the reality the European elite is finally waking up to, late, disoriented, and with no plan, while Trump moves with the confidence of someone who believes the hottest and strongest country in the world gets to rewrite borders, rewrite markets, and rewrite alliances. And if Europe still doesn't understand what time it is, the 1st of February 2026 will begin teaching the lesson in tariffs, followed by the 1st of June 2026 with a bigger hammer, until Greenland is priced, packaged, and handed over in whatever form Washington decides is the deal.